All right, let's dive right in. In this explainer, we're going to break down one of the most influential approaches in language education today, task-based language teaching, or TBLT for short. We're going to unpack what it is, exactly how it works, and why it's such a big deal.
So, to really get a handle on TBLT, we've got to start with the most important word here, task. What does that actually mean in this context? Because, it's way more specific than just any old activity you might do in a classroom. This definition from David Noonan pretty much says it all. The big takeaway here, the whole point, is the focus on meaning. The students are trying to achieve a real-world goal, like, say, planning a trip or solving a puzzle. The language just becomes the tool they use to get the job done, not the object they're studying under a microscope.
So what does this actually look like? Well, it's a huge shift from older methods. Instead of drilling verb charts, students are totally focused on the process of communicating. The goal isn't practice the past tense. The goal is tell your partner about your last vacation. The past tense just becomes the natural tool you reach for to get that done. It really connects what happens in the classroom to what happens in real life.
Okay, so we've got the main features down, but why does this actually work? Let's dig into the key principles, the real engine that makes TBLT so effective. I really love this quote because it puts everything in perspective. TBLT is part of a bigger philosophy called communicative language teaching, or CLT, which basically says the whole reason we learn a language is, well, to communicate. So if CLT is the why we should focus on real communication, then TBLT is the practical how-to. It's the blueprint for actually doing it in the classroom.
A really great task is so much more than just a fill-in-the-blank worksheet. It actually gives students ownership. They have to take the initiative, work together, and bring their own personal experiences into the mix. And it pushes them to think critically, not just spit back memorized phrases. When you get all these pieces right, it feels a lot less like a lesson and more like you're solving a fun, engaging puzzle.
Okay, so what does this actually look like in a real lesson plan? Well, the most widely used model for this comes from an educator named Jane Willis, and she breaks it down into a really clear 3-stage cycle. The structure is actually pretty simple. You've got these 3 phases. First, the pre-task, to get everyone on the same page. Then, you've got the task cycle itself. That's where the real action happens. And finally, you have the language focus, where you kind of step back and analyze the language that just came up. It's a really natural flow, right? You get to use the language first, and only after that do you stop to analyze it.
This framework really gives us a great map of the whole journey. You get the pre-task to set the stage, the task cycle for all the doing and communicating, and the language focus to reflect and learn. So let's break down what actually happens in each of these stages.
First up is the pre-task. This is all about getting ready. The teacher's job is to introduce the topic and make absolutely sure everyone understands the goal. But, and this part is so important, they don't pre-teach all the grammar and vocab needed, because a huge part of the learning is for the students to figure out what language they need for themselves as they go.
All right, now we're at the heart of the lesson. The students just get to work, using whatever language they can pull together to solve the problem. They're actually communicating for a real reason. Then they plan how to share what they found and report back to everyone, which, adds this whole other layer of purpose to what they're doing.
Now, here's where things get really different from a traditional lesson. The detailed focus on language comes after the communication has already happened. The teacher might point out a great phrase someone used, or they might tackle a common mistake a lot of people were making. See, the point is, the grammar practice isn't some random thing from a textbook. It's totally connected to the real communication problems the students just ran into. Okay, so that's the theory, but what do these tasks actually look like? Let's get into some real-world examples to make this all a bit more concrete.
This just shows you how TBLT really leans on real-world stuff. So instead of some boring textbook dialogue, you might get a real newspaper and have to create a job ad, or you watch a real weather forecast and have to create a weather map. These tasks feel authentic because they're the kinds of things people actually do.
And what's cool is that this approach is incredibly flexible. It can work for a group of beginners in Korea trying to draw a map together, and it can work for advanced business students in Switzerland collaborating on a project. The common thread, the really key thing, is that they all have a clear non-language goal. Finish the map, complete the project. The language just becomes the tool, the bridge to get to that goal.
So, okay, what's the payoff for all this? Well, the research is pretty clear. When TBLT is done right, the benefits for students can be absolutely huge.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Because students are working on things that feel real and relevant, their motivation just tends to skyrocket. They become more independent learners, they're more willing to take a risk and try something new with a language, and ultimately it can lead to much higher levels of proficiency. It's basically that classic idea of learning by doing brought to life.
But, of course, no method is perfect. To get the full picture, we really have to talk about some of the challenges and demands that come with TBLT. It's not always easy.
You see, this approach asks a lot of teachers. You don't just need to be super proficient in the language yourself. You also have to be great at creating materials, adapting on the fly, and guiding students without just giving them the answers. And it can be really tough to make this work in a school system that's all about old-school standardized tests that just focus on grammar rules.
And this all leads us to the big question, doesn't it? We know TBLT can be incredibly powerful. It promotes real communication and much deeper learning. But we also know it's really demanding. So is it something that's realistic for every single classroom out there? Or is it an ideal that's maybe best left to the most experienced teachers? And that's really the big challenge, the conversation that's happening right now in language education.